What's going on, guys? Today we have a really good topic. I'm discussing the risk to reward ratio when chasing velocity. Okay, we know that velocity is the number one key metric that guys are looking to improve in order to move on to the next level. Whether you're in high school trying to go D1 or just trying to get into college in general, or you're in college trying to get into the draft, or maybe high school trying to get in the draft, whatever level that you're trying to move up in this game, people throw harder. Now, although this is going to be pretty much geared towards pitchers, I will say as far as position players go, it's the same thing. Guys just have the ability to throw harder at higher levels. Granted, the position you play matters. On average, first basemen, catchers, they don't need to throw that hard comparative to like a shortstop and a right fielder, right? Those guys usually have the ability to throw a lot harder. But in general, you don't have a shortstop not being able to throw the ball right around 90 miles an hour if he needed to in the big leagues. Like most of them have pretty good arms. Same thing goes for a right fielder or just the outfield in general. Okay. Second baseman, obviously, they have shorter throws, so they need quicker hands, quicker feet. They don't really need, 90, 95 in the tank as long as they're pretty accurate, pretty good there. But it goes without saying, velocity is an important metric to chase. How you chase it is also important, okay? And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But first off, I want to start with saying the risk to reward. Sometimes guys, when they're younger, they're in high school and they want to chase velocity, parents and some coaches are usually like, no, that's not healthy. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't throw weighted balls. You shouldn't train in that way because velocity will just come. I'm here to tell you, unless you are genetically gifted, superior above all other people, and you just got it in the tank like that, and puberty does a number on you, velocity will not just come. It doesn't just happen, okay? And I'm a really good example of that. So I threw somewhat hard as a freshman. I was throwing 84 miles an hour as a freshman in high school. When I got to college as a freshman, I would still throw 84 miles an hour. Now, granted, when I was a freshman in high school, I was a two-way, so I pitched as well. But I mean, now I'm throwing 84 from across the diamond at shortstop. Like, that's not ideal. It's okay, but I knew that I needed to throw harder. Now, me and my personal experience, I really obsess about throwing velocity development. I probably went a little bit overboard. I got to the point where I could, shuffle fire 95 at my peak. That was my best throw ever, right? I didn't need that necessarily, but it was nice to be able to have it. And plays got a lot easier for me deep in the hole and things of that nature. But as far as chasing velocity as a player in high school or college, you have to weigh your risk to reward. And in my opinion, the risk is always worth the reward, always 10 times out of 10. Because if you don't risk it, what could happen then? Like, look at the odds of moving up in the game then. Limited on playing time, limited on the ability to move up. Like, those deter you from actually making baseball a career. And if you're passionate about baseball and you want it to be a career, then obviously that's not a good thing. So we have to be able to increase our velocity. And we have to be okay with that. Now, how we go about it is pretty different depending on the person, right? So if you are an underdeveloped high school athlete, you're skin and bones, you weigh $140, like, yeah, going through a bunch of velocity phases isn't really going to be the thing that moves the needle in your velocity development. Could it help? Probably, but you're not really going to maintain it. You don't have the adequate strength yet to be able to handle that demand, okay? You also probably don't have the throwing fitness to be able to handle that demand. So here's some outlier metrics, okay? In the MLB right now, over 70% of the pitchers weigh over 213 pounds. The average height in the MLB for pitchers is 6'2" and right around 213 pounds. Okay, so if you're 15 years old, you weigh 140, 170 pounds, and you're not done growing yet, it's like you probably don't have the hormones to pack on a ton of lean mass yet, but that would most likely be step one, is to get very, very strong, very explosive, and handle that first. Okay, putting the cart before the horse and trying to just sell out on velo training because you know that you need to throw harder, you could probably tack on a few more miles per hour for that. But do you then have the capacity in your body to withstand that demand over and over and over again? Not just withstand it, but be able to have the capacity to maintain that velocity that you gain from doing a bunch of velo phase at that age? Probably not. So here at OPP, we have our guys make sure that they have adequate strength first. It may take several months for them to ever go into a velocity phase when training here. And for parents and athletes, sometimes that's not the response that you want to have, but we could care less. We know that the weight room alone impacts their velocity a ton just by making sure that they can put on some good, healthy, lean mass and get structurally stronger in that process. On top of that, building throwing fitness is completely separate than building physical fitness. Okay, so there's physical abilities that you need with an optimal surplus to play baseball at a high level. That's like explosive strength. Maximal strength is actually really important because it raises the ceiling of your explosive strength, your absolute strength, not maximal strength. And being able to have those qualities go up excessively is major. But if you don't have the ability to be extremely strong yet or be extremely explosive yet, there is really no point in just selling out for weighted ball velocity training yet. But there will be a point where that is 100% necessary, okay? For some guys, they're genetically better than others. They respond better to the weight room than other athletes. So they could go through a summer of training here starting at 15 years old, which we have had people do that. We had people do that this year as well. And they put on 10 miles an hour and they went through one velo phase. But the entire time that they were here, they also gained 20 pounds. Like, what do you think really moved the needle there? Was it the velo phase? Probably not. It was the weight room. The velo phase, the only thing that did, in my opinion, is just teach them how to have intent in their throwing, which is a skill. Learning how to throw hard in and of itself and learn the intent behind that skill is a skill. And if you've never actually pushed the envelope on that, then just doing that alone will help you, okay? But I want to go back to the risk. If you're scared about blowing it out or tearing it, there is an opportunity that will happen regardless of what you do. You could do absolutely everything right in high school and college. Take care of your nutrition. Take care of your sleep. Take care of your recovery. Take care of your training. And you can build all your capacities up really high and still have a freak accident and blow your elbow out or tear your labrum. That stuff happens to guys. And although how much that sucks could really impact your career, is it worth it? Absolutely. Because if you don't chase it, you probably won't play, right? Now, it's a little bit different if you already have a high ceiling, then that's probably where you actually need to start reaching out to coaches and get guidance on how to maintain that ability and improve other things in your arsenal, because velocity isn't the only thing that matters. Your stuff, your command, all of that comes into play as a pitcher. Being able to do that is extremely important. But if you are already throwing 95 and you're in high school, you don't really need to push the envelope to throw 100 yet. Like, yeah, you can, and it would probably raise your draft stock, but it's not like the end all be all. I need to go through consistent velo phases all the time in order to make sure that I throw 100 miles an hour before I graduate. It's not as important as the kid who throws 80 miles an hour as a junior, has no commitments, no colleges wants to even take a look at him because, by the way, kids are getting cut now throwing 90 miles an hour at JUCOs, all right? It's different for him. The reward is so much greater for him if he can get to 90, so much greater. Whereas the reward for the high school athlete who already throws really hard is not that much different than what it currently already is because he is extremely blessed and throwing hard already, right? Some other stats that I think are important we have right now in our facility a 2025. It's 2024 at the time of this podcast, by the way. We have a 2025 throwing 97 miles an hour. He's been throwing 95 for like 3 years. Okay, his odds of that ligament going are significantly higher than others. However, over the last 3 years, he never misses. He has been so consistent with his weight training with us that he's built up, in my opinion, the capacity to be able to handle a lot more gameplay than other pitchers that are throwing just as hard as him at his age. Now, let's talk about his body weight and size. He's also like 6'5", 6'4", throwing 97 and weighs, I think, 230 or 235. The average weight in MLB is 213 at 6'2". He's right there. He's as developed as those older guys. Now, his ligaments, tendons, tissues, those are not as developed yet just because of time. And he simply hasn't thrown as much as the other guys have. But he's right there. He's right on par to be an extremely good athlete. So him going out, selling out, chasing as many velocity phases as possible every year is not ideal. We've spent a lot of time over the last few years building his arsenal, working on his stuff, working on his command, things of that nature in order to raise his draft stock, right? Where now the average fastball velocity in MLB is right around 94 miles an hour. I think it's like 93.7 or something like that. right around 94 miles an hour. That's the average there. So if you're in high school, you have to think, all right, I have to develop a minimal threshold of my skill level in order to play at the next level. That minimal threshold is whatever the next level currently does on average. So at a D1, I'm assuming, I haven't looked up any stats on this, but I'm assuming the average, if you just look at D1s, like maybe in the SEC, maybe not mid-majors, you're probably looking at anywhere from 90 to 95 on starters on average. Okay, right around in there, probably 92, 93, similar to what major league starters are. Knowing that, if you throw mid-eights in high school, is it worth it if your dream, your goal, your career goal is to get into a D1 eventually, whether that's JUCO for a couple years or right out of high school? If your goal is to do that, it's worth everything to risk it to try to raise your velocity right now and build it up so that way you have the ability to do that, because that actually gets you a foot in the door. It actually gives you an opportunity to play at the level that you're trying to play at. But if you're trying to throw 87 and spot up the corners, it doesn't, like 87 is still 87. To a good D1 hitter, that is meat, all right? It doesn't really matter how much your stuff moves when you throw 85, 87. Like mid-eights is not that impressive anymore. Maybe 5, 10 years ago, sure. But being the crafty lefty is not like as sought after as it is in high school, you know? And so one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast is because I have been training athletes for almost a decade now, working with pitchers, hitters, just baseball players in general. And I've had a lot of pitchers come in who have relied on the stigma that has been put upon them as like the small, athletic, not hard, but crafty lefty, right? That just like spots it up, or the crafty righty that comes in a pinch and does it. Their dream is to be a pitcher in college, and yet they are nowhere near, because their high school coaches and their parents and everybody who they've taken lessons from have told them that you are the crafty guy that just throws strikes. Like that's what's important. And so they really start to believe it. They put that onus on them, and they're like, okay, this is the picture I see myself as. And so they can't even fathom. They can't even think of themselves like throwing 90, 95. That doesn't really happen in their mindset, because they're like, this works for me right now. I'm getting some time at my high school, right? That is not ideal. That is not a good headspace to be in. And it's a hard conversation to have when I talk to them and I'm like, look, these are the averages at the level that you want to play at. First, I ask them, like, where do you see yourself? Where do you want to? Of course, they want to go D1. No high school kid doesn't want to go D1. They want to go D1. They want to play at that level. And I'm like, okay, this is like the average fastball velocity there, like 92, 93. You throw 80, 82, 83. Like, I don't really care about your stuff right now. I don't care how your curveball moves. I don't care how much bite your slider has. I'm not impressed with that right now, because you currently aren't even going to get a look. Like, you're just not good enough yet. And that's a hard conversation to have. And there's a lot of kids listening to this probably right now who just wasted an entire summer playing summer ball, who throw 80, 82 and have no shot of moving on to college, but their parents are just like, you need to play more games to get better at baseball. And their coach has probably convinced them to go play because they need the money. So having that conversation with an athlete, if you're that athlete right now, imagine I'm having that conversation with you, okay? It just doesn't matter. Until you can actually get that fastball velocity up and make it to the point where now you actually have an opportunity to get looked at and play at the next level, shoot for upper eights at least. Then get into the nines. Like, set attainable goals that you can start trying to work towards right now. Okay, there is a way to do it. We take our guys in and out of developmental phases throughout the fall prior to them getting into competition phase in the spring, especially if their velocity is still low, because they can, as a PO, they can definitely make some decent strides on their velocity if they're doing everything else right. If they're consistent in the weight room, they're handling their training, they're on top of their nutrition, they're on top of their sleep. If they're that committed of an athlete, they can make some dents in their progress for sure. But the hard part is actually doing that. I can't tell you how many times I've seen athletes who are all excited about risking it. They're all excited about trying to chase velocity training and start to throw harder. And then they realize how hard it actually is, how hard you have to work in the weight room, how consistent you have to be with your food, especially if you're underweight, how consistent you have to be in the weight room and not miss a training session, how consistent you have to be on top of your throwing development. So that way your planned intensity, frequency, and volume are orchestrated in a path to send you upwards with some progression. They don't realize how hard it is. And then after they go a few months into it and they're like, man, this is a lot harder than I thought. And I haven't really thrown that much harder yet. They get discouraged. They start picking up extra games on the side. They start worrying about stuff that still doesn't matter. And it's like, dude, this may take a while. Like, you may be somebody who this takes years, and you got to be okay with that. There's very few people, I've been doing this for a while, but there's very few people who have come in and in just a couple months, like, made drastic, huge gains, 5-10 miles an hour in velocity. Like, a lot of those people are born better, and they just didn't have the right training that they needed beforehand. A lot of those people also were extremely consistent, and the weight room affected them different than how it's going to affect you, because you don't have the same genetics that they do, right? They're just born better. And it sucks to hear that, but if you're like the 99%, like me and like the rest of the people that are listening to this podcast right now, it's going to take time. It's going to take consistency. But in my opinion, the risk is 100% always worth the reward. The last thing I want to talk about is youth. Okay, I kind of brought it up at the beginning of this session, but if you're underdeveloped, if you're physically, you don't have the capacity to throw hard yet, is it worth risking it? Absolutely, but you got to risk it in the weight room. Like, you need to start hammering that in your food and your sleep. Step one, like, do that first, because you don't have the hormones yet until puberty starts coming on heavy. Usually it's right around that 15-year-old mark where the puberty starts. You got the hormones now to start packing on lean muscle mass. But up until then, you can still get structurally extremely strong, right? Your bones can get stronger by hitting the weight room. Your tissues can become stronger by hitting the weight room. Your nervous system can get a significant increase by hitting the weight room. And that alone can help you throw harder at a younger age without having to spend a ton of time on just blowing your arm out trying to throw harder and throw a bunch of weighted balls because you hope it works, okay? As far as, like, once you get past high school, you get into college and you start really chasing it and you're like, hey, my goal is to play pro ball now, but you're stuck in that mid-eights range. The odds of you playing pro ball, throwing mid-eights, is extremely low. You're lucky you got into college, to be 100% honest with you. And it depends on what level you're playing at, but you're pretty lucky that you got in there. Knowing that, when you're in college, is the risk worth the reward? If this is the career that you actually want to have, you want to get paid to play baseball, I mean, that's almost a stupid question, right? But moms, dads, coaches, people will get in your ear and they'll tell you that it's just not the way. You need to worry more about your command and your stuff, but you throw 80 poo. It's like you're putting the cart before the horse, man. You really, it's always worth it to risk it for that. And then on top of that, let's talk just a little bit about strength training, okay? Just a little bit. When it comes to strength training, the risk to reward ratio that happens in there, with us, we use a conjugate system. Okay, and in that, there's maximal effort work, there's dynamic effort work. If you're not sure what that is, I've talked a lot about it on podcasts, on YouTube, on our website, on our blogs. Go ahead, dive into that. But in essence, what we're trying to do is raise your absolute strength, because it raises the ceiling of your explosive strength. Raise your explosive strength, and then also attack all the other qualities that are needed to be a high-level athlete. That's why the conjugate system, in my opinion, is the best system in the world in order to do that. And we've been using it for 7-8 years now, tailoring it just towards baseball players. And I'm 99.9% sure we are the only people that do that at this level, that have been doing it and running this race for as long as we have. The risk in there, when it comes to like 1-rep maxes and things like that, it's worth it. But you have to have really quality technique. You have to have a decent training age, and you have to progress yourself there. So high quality coaching at an early age is extremely important in order to get there. Okay, but once you get there, it's worth it. Even if you're in pro ball, it's worth it, because you have to be able to raise the capacity of your body to be able to withstand the demand of your sport. There's a lot that goes into swinging. There's a lot that goes into throwing. There's a lot that goes into sprinting that you need to be able to withstand at extremely high amounts. Being strong enough is not a thing. So you have to continuously push that number, that envelope, so you can raise your explosive strength and be able to handle the demands of your sport. It doesn't matter the level. And so for us, I know a lot of the pro guys that come in here, it's crazy, but they have never risked it in the weight room because everybody's too scared to touch them. Some of the D1 guys, same thing. Like, they just haven't really strained in the weight room. So go figure, they start training here and they pack on a few more miles an hour easy because of the weight room, and they start hitting the ball harder easy because of the weight room. And they're like, oh, this is what real training actually feels like, because they're not getting stressed enough, mainly because people are scared about the risk to reward ratio. But here's on the reward side, the reward has such an upside to it, that not risking it in my opinion, is worse than risking it, because now you're leaving that athlete susceptible to injuries because you were too scared to train them the way that they should have been trained from the beginning. They're high-level athletes. They're not glass dolls. They should be stressed. They should work their ass off. They should know what it's like to become the most physically fit version of themselves. They absolutely should. They shouldn't be baby because they're worth millions of dollars, right? The risk is always going to be worth it. It just depends on if you are really, really, truly willing to sacrifice in order to get there. All right, guys, that's it for this episode. If that helped you out, please let me know just by subscribing, liking, sharing this podcast with anybody that you can. And please, if it only takes just a couple seconds, if you go up, you give us a little quick 5-star rating, it would mean the world to me. Thank you.